Hi, everyone. um, well, I had a great time going through your experience reports this last week. Um, it's just I find that to be so rich. Your descriptions of your relationship with nature, using these different sort of imaginative lenses to approach nature with. I mean, I just find it fascinating, and I love where all of you took it, and perhaps we'll talk about that on Monday. Um, and then I've been reading through your posts on this week of the new physics and the quandary that it appears to leave us in as modern humans in terms of what should our worldview be. And I so in 2 weeks' time we have a week called the critique of modern science. So it's a week where we'll look at critiques of modern science, I guess. Well, not it's not rigorous. There's a gazillion critiques of modern science, a gazillion places we could go to for that. Um, so it's limited in that respect. I've picked a few, but then we will jump in ourselves with our own critique that we sort of come up with together, the critique of modern science, and none of it to say that modern science is bad. It's just sort of recognizing what it is rather than what it is often purported to be. I suppose something like that. And that very topic gets the most sticky when we get into quantum theory. And I should have that book somewhere, but I've mentioned it before. So Ken Wilber wrote this book where he gathered together the philosophical writings, Heisenberg, Schrodinger, Planck, and others, um, who James Jeans and others who they were all incredibly philosophical. They became mystical, and they wrote extensively. I want to say, their philosophical writings are very hard to follow. So one becomes a little bit dependent on Ken Wilber, who makes a detailed analysis of all of their writings and tries to summarize them, condense them down in his introduction, which is a fascinating introduction to this book. It's the book Quantum Questions. And um, so whether one agrees with Wilber's interpretation of the philosophical writings of the early quantum theorists or not, nevertheless, it represents it brings forth an interesting and contrasting view on the significance of quantum theory and its arrival on the scene. And so I couldn't, but even though we have this week on the critique of modern science, I'm like reading your post. I couldn't sort of stop myself. I have to express something about it or ask some questions of you because the question comes down to this: what possible significance could any scientific theory have on the meaning of the universe? Something like that. So, prior to quantum theory, prior to quantum theory and relativity, we had the Newtonian universe, and in a way, we still have it because most science still uses that view, that worldview. We still have a Newtonian, predominantly Newtonian, and quantum theory, as we've recognized, has not been able to tell us how our view should be different. There's a sense that the Newtonian view is wrong, but I don't really know what else to tell you. You should think something like that, which is not very useful. And and the other thing is that I'm not even sure that the Newtonian view, as Newton would have had it, was what we would think, because for him God was very much still in the universe, and his discoveries about gravity he found tremendously mysterious because there was this thing which was that he couldn't really fathom, which was this idea that there's action at a distance. So between planets, for example, It's like, well, there's nothing there between the things. How could there be this action at a distance? For them at that time, that was inherently mysterious. But nonetheless, Newton and other scientists were discovering God in the universe via teasing out these laws of nature, like the laws of gravity that he discovered, and the laws of motion and whatnot. So for them, it wasn't a flattening of the universe, as so many of you described so well. For him, it was an enchanting of the universe, his discovery. So Newton, even though we look at a Newtonian world and we say to ourselves, well, it made the world mechanical, that actually wasn't true for Newton and other scientists that did come up with the theories that did make the universe eventually mechanical. So it's important to say that for them there was a miracle going on. So then how do we distinguish that from the discovery of, or the invention of, that's an interesting question right there, discovery of or invention of quantum theory? And how does that change things? How does quantum theory change things? So from the perspective of Newton, I don't think it does. I don't think Einstein changes things, and I don't think quantum theory changes things, because it's still discovering God in the universe, the divine, this mysterious substratum of existence that is sort of beyond us, the intelligence of the universe, if you like. So fundamentally, I think for Newton, that's okay. So you think it works like this now rather than that, but nevertheless, it's still uncovering this aspect of the universe. So I don't think that for Newton, I don't think it would have given rise to a different perspective, a totally different worldview, in the way that it seems for some of us that it has or does or can assist with. So there's that. But I would like to ask the question: what are the things about quantum theory that might make us think that it is more conducive to spirituality? What are the things about quantum theory that would do that? And we have these things such as the interconnectedness. So particles are entangled. Sometimes, potentially across the entire universe, particles are entangled. So particles are then interconnected in some mysterious way. So this leads to the concept of non-locality. We used to think in science that locality was basically a law of nature. Things affected each other because of locality, their proximity to one another. And quantum theory has blown that apart, at least to some degree, the particle level at least, so that the particles could be interconnected across the entire universe. How does that affect the meaning of the universe is my question to you. And acknowledging that the particles that are interconnected are just these phenomena, right? Empty phenomena that have laws associated with them. They're not magical or conscious or in any other way. They're part of the mechanism, if you like. So what are we doing with quantum theory? Are we doing anything more than just modifying the mechanism, how we think the mechanism works? So now the mechanism is much more interconnected, perhaps, than it was. Okay, still a mechanism, potentially. You can disagree with me. We'll fight if you want. So quantum mechanics is probabilistic. Okay, so now we've got a machine still that runs on probabilistic rules rather than totally deterministic rules. Say, for example, the probabilities are actually ultimately deterministic, but let's leave that aside. So this machine that I can make this machine, a quantum computer, it works on probabilistic uh, mechanisms. It's still a mechanism, right? Isn't it? Has at any point the quantum mechanical system become more than mechanics? And then there's the question that arises as to our relationship with, so the suggestion that consciousness is involved, whatever consciousness is, but we don't know what that is, but consciousness is involved, our consciousness is involved in the collapse of the wave function, for example, in the double slit experiment or other kinds of experiments. So, so within the realms of physics, this is, that perspective is resisted. There are many views of quantum theory that do not involve consciousness in the collapse of the wave function. Such as, for example, it's really just the encounter of particles with macroscopic objects, like the experimental apparatus, for example, and that causes the collapse of the wave function. So there's other interpretations, the Copenhagen interpretation, which the consciousness one is the most well-known and the most popularized, and the perhaps is the most common view among scientists. But these things are shifting. So, and scientists are increasingly interested, I see, in making it mechanistic and not tied to consciousness, whatever consciousness is. Now, don't forget that consciousness, to a materialistic scientist, is an epiphenomena of the brain. So there's nothing particularly mystical about it. In fact, many think it's just a kind of illusion. That view doesn't work, but I'm just throwing that out there. So are we indeed disturbing the materialistic view of the universe when we think about quantum theory? And I'm just asking that question and throwing it out there, basically. And and even if consciousness does cause the collapse of the wave function in these experiments, what are the implications of that for our world, our macroscopic world? Well, we don't know. So we don't know. So and does it, even with the involvement of consciousness, does it move us from a non-mechanical system to something that is intrinsically mystical, spiritual, or beyond mechanism? And I'm throwing these questions out there, and I'm not answering them, but I think it's important to ask these questions. So one has to be aware that quantum theory has been used commercially to make it seem mystical and spiritual by certain scientists, like in the that movie, was that movie the what the bleep, like in the movie What the Bleep, for example. So there was a physicist in that talking about these sort of spiritual implications of quantum theory, taking it very far. And it's been used by others. I mean, we stick the word quantum in front of something like quantum healing, and that makes it special. What is quantum healing? Is it actually special? Or is that just a throwaway word that we've used? Quantum this, quantum that, quantum everything. So I'm putting this out there not to sort of destroy the magic of quantum physics, which actually almost anything in science is magical to me, but no, not to do that, but to promote a kind of caution in terms of interpretation, in terms of philosophically taking interpretations too far, where one oughtn't to. And why would one not want to take interpretations too far? Because that obscures the true process of getting to those conclusions, such as the interconnectedness of everything. There's a truer process, a more true process of getting to those, rather than the conceptual one, which is the quantum theory one. Now, this takes us to the views of the early quantum physicists who were very philosophical and became mystical in the process. And what was it that triggered, catalyzed this shift towards the mystical in those scientists? And I believe, I think I believe, and I think Ken Wilber agrees that it's not what you think it is. It's not what you think it was. And that we'll have to talk about. So it's a sort of a surprisingly different perspective on what actually propelled them into the mystical view. And we'll talk about that. But some of you are already there, right? You're already there in realizing that your relationship with nature, when it's via a scientific view, is what's secondhand was the word some of you use, secondhand. It's conceptual, right? It's a conceptualized view. So it's not a direct experiential view, it's a conceptualized view. Now, conceptualized views that you hold, as we've gone through all of this stuff on worldview, affect what you see, what you can see. So one ought to be careful about the conceptualized views that one holds, and one needs to hold them extremely lightly, right? Extremely loosely, I would say. We can't avoid, we're human, we can't avoid having conceptualized views of things. We're going to conceptualize, but what's our relationship to that conceptualization? Well, that's a big question here with this looking at the modern science and how we translate, how we move from that to a worldview, right? From this conceptual understanding to a worldview that is at heart, one would hope, a more directly experiential one. How does one move between these two? How does a conceptual worldview lead you there? Aside from it merely being suggestive, which we've already done that, right? Because I just gave you the suggestion last week that everything's a mystery, and look at how that changes things. So the suggestion that everything's mechanical or that everything's interconnected, or obviously that has its effect on what we see, what we experience, and therein might lie the value of quantum theory, if you like, in its effect on what we can experience. But in and of itself, intrinsically, does it go there, or is it just something that for some people points in a direction that we intrinsically want to go? These questions are all important, and it's a very important that we tease them out, because otherwise we'll be walking in to this realm of science and spirituality and integrating the two with a misconception, with carrying misconceptions with us that are affecting what we can see and what we can know. So that we do need to tease this out, and we'll probably do that, take a shot at that in the week that's on the critique of modern science. But I couldn't stop myself talking about it at this point in time, because let's put question marks there. Let's have that be something of a mystery. What does modern science, quantum theory, relativity, what does that mean for the world? Does it lead to a world of meaning intrinsically? And what's our relationship with the concepts that we think are true and contained within quantum physics and relativity? And we'll have to talk about all of that. Because, well, maybe I should wait, but there's kind of like a royal road. And the royal road is rather like the Native American the red road. You know, it's the road that you walk that is the true road. You're walking true, and not deceived, not based on illusion. You're walking the true road. The true road to the meaning, the sense of meaning of the universe, the sense of meaningfulness of that true road to that could pass through science, but it certainly doesn't have to. And the question is, what does science do to it? How is science used in that path? How could it be used in that path in a way to help you walk the royal red road? And and does certain conceptual understandings that we think help us, in fact, do they in fact not help us? And they're actually because they're misconceptions, and they're really like side roads that might appear to take you there, but they don't stay on the royal red road, something like that. So I'm just throwing all of that out there, and as always, I'm giving you my view, my perspectives, and these are totally up for discussion with you guys. Hopefully the benefit of my experience does bring something to the table, but it doesn't mean it's right. So, and therefore we should talk and we should discuss, and we'll see what happens. All right, everyone, and thanks for your engagement with the course. It's very enjoyable for me to interact with all of you. Okay, bye-bye.